Board to order. My name is Micah Vincent. I serve as the Director of the Office of Management and Budget for the state of Indiana. I want to do introductions here in a minute, but first I want to recognize that this meeting is in compliance with the open door law of the state of Indiana. The agenda has been posted, and after that, following that, we will move towards introducing ourselves. As I said, Micah Vincent, Director of the Office of Management and Budget for the state of Indiana. Start maybe on this side, Senator Melton.
Senator Eddie Melton, representing the 3rd District. That's Gary, Maryville, Hobart, Crown Point, Lake Station, and New Chicago.
Paul Joyce, State Examiner.
Courtney Scoffsma, I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Local Government Finance.
And my name is Ken. State Representative Milo Smith. I was appointed by the Speaker to represent the House.
Great, thank you. And just one item of note, did want to recognize that the makeup of the DUAB board has changed from this session into where it is now. So there are 3 legislative advisors. So Senator Melton and Representative Smith are filling that role. I think and Senator Ryan Mishler is the other. And so they are non-voting members of the board, but they're here in the advisory capacity. Then the 4 of us are also, we are voting members. So Paul Joyce, myself, Courtney, and Mr. Hatcher. I don't know why I blanked on your first name. I've known you for several years. So with that, I do want to move to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes from the May 15th, 2017 and June 2nd, 2017 meetings. The minutes are in front of you.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you. The next order of business is for the appointment of the emergency manager for Muncie Community Schools. And what I'd like to do is run through, I'll state each name, and then I think I'll go back and state each name and make a couple introductory comments from myself, and then open it up for the board to discuss. So with that in mind, we did have 4 that submitted and were interviewed as part of the process to select the emergency manager for Muncie Schools. The first, as contemplated by Senate Enrolled Act 567, was the current superintendent, Dr. Ball, and his team. The next was the Robert Bob group. Next was Crow Horvath, and then finally was administrator assistants. So with that in mind, I thought what I would do is go in, I'll make a couple of comments, pros and cons of each, and then just open it up for discussion of each entity, and then we will move into a broader discussion of all of them together. Does that sound good to the board? Okay, great. Well, the first one obviously was Dr. Ball and his team, the current superintendent, and did want to recognize that the legislation itself contemplated him being part of that discussion, and so he was therefore a part of it. I think we've seen that he is somebody that has a plan and is making hard decisions that aren't easy. We see that as a benefit, as a pro, that Dr. Ball is taking on tough things and addressing them. Some concerns or maybe cons is that it does not add an independent view into this process. So this is a process where there have been a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts of just what's the right thing for this community. And so having Dr. Ball be the one that's selected would not add in an independent voice. So again, on the pro side, we see has a plan, is making hard decisions, doing things that aren't easy. On the con side, I see that as it's not a new independent voice into this process. So I'd like to open it up to members of the board, just of your thoughts and considerations with Dr. Ball.
From my standpoint, as somebody, is it on now?
No.
Standpoint, it's
There you go.
I'm doing ring, they look the same to me. Micah's points as far as having somebody that is already attached to the school was problematic to me whenever I looked at it from a con standpoint, and whether that person was on the school board, and continued on the school board, or whether the person was superintendent. And I even asked that question to Dr. Ball, how that would affect his current relationship with the school board, moving forward. And in a relationship in a school, the superintendent is hired by the school board. So I thought, looking from that, it could be problematic going forward for him. And of course, we're not looking in a short term only for the Muncie schools. In my mind, we're looking at what is the best and a long-term solution. So that, for me, that's a big con from looking at, what's from a long-term plan. From a positive standpoint, I can tell you that from the time that Dr. Ball did become superintendent, he did call our office and was continually asking questions about how to correct the issues at Muncie Community School Corporation and bringing up the issues there, and was looking for solutions at Muncie Community Schools. So he was very active in trying to find solutions. So, I think he brought a lot to the table and definitely was a qualified candidate to interview.
Other comments? Thoughts? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Dr. Ball had to make some tough decisions when he was called in because of school corporation's financial woes. And at the same time, I'm concerned about the people that are divided in Muncie School Corporation. You got people on the left, people on the right, and they're real concerned about what process we should follow to correct things in the Muncie School Corporation. And I would think that Dr. Ball's personality of dividing the teams, is what I've observed, will be something very difficult for us to overcome, and that's my biggest concern. Thank you.
Anybody else? Senator Melton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to kind of share just a few thoughts prior to legislation and currently dealing with Dr. Ball. Had a chance to hear Dr. Ball present during testimony in the same chambers right here during, I believe, the Ways and Means when Senate Bill 567 came before the Ways and Means Committee. And at that time, it was solely for the Gary Community School Corporation. Myself and several of my colleagues on the Senate side, Senate Democrats, firmly believe it was a little bit premature to put Muncie in Senate Bill 567. However, the district needs some assistance, and we are firmly aware of that. I do believe that there was another option in terms of a little bit more of a less drastic process when it comes down to Muncie, particularly because of the nature of the bill. I would, serving as an advisor on DUAB now, I don't want to come out as a firm supporter of the way things once was. I know that Dr. Ball presents the skill set. However, I have received multiple messages and emails from the community in terms of their thoughts of not having someone that is from the existing administration to lead the district. So that's the issue that I have in terms of the dividedness in the community and bringing on the existing superintendent to lead the district currently out of his current situation. So just wanted to share my thoughts in that regard.
Any other comments? Okay. Then the next one I have listed is the Robert Bob Group. This is a very seasoned group that's very used to dealing with school corporations that are in financial distress. I think that they are certainly a very professional firm. I thought that was very clear in their interview process that they've been there and they've done that. And they certainly have seen these difficult situations and know how to handle them. The question I had through the process, and what I guess I would see as a con, is this the right solution at this time? I think that, like you mentioned, Senator Melton, there certainly has been discussion of how to look at the Muncie School Corporation. I think the legislation that was in its final form did that and kind of delineated between the two school corporations and their different positions and kind of where they're at from a financial status, and treated the two school corporations that are part of this process differently in that way. And so when I think about that I think of the Robert Bob Group in light of that, certainly very professional, seasoned firm. My question is, are they the firm that is the right size for where we're at right now with Muncie? But again, on the other hand, also looking at them as certainly very professional, very experienced, very used to dealing with very difficult situations. So those are my thoughts. Open up to thoughts of the committee.
I would agree with you. I think they presented a very clear path and an approach, but for Muncie schools, especially given kind of the quick turnaround that we're going to be experiencing with Muncie schools in terms of reevaluating all of this, I do wonder if perhaps their approach is a little bit more than what we need in this particular situation.
Yes. Any other thoughts, Robert Bob Group?
I would just add that during their interview, they were very professional, very well prepared. I thought as well. They were more of a takeover type group that came in, and it was very open. I think during the discussions and early on that their community involvement was necessary and wanted, and I didn't feel that in this case, as far as the con goes, that you was going to get that with this particular group, and definitely in the Muncie situation. With, like I say, we were looking for a quick turnaround in 6 months. When you're looking at that, on whether it's going to happen real quick, and then if it goes to the long term, that's another story. We have to look at that, but that would be the biggest con. But as far as the pros, they definitely are prepared as an organization, and they have all the assets and equipment necessary.
The next entity was Crow Horwath. Again, this is from my perspective when I look at benefits and concerns with that group. I think benefits is that they certainly have local Indiana ties, a depth of knowledge, and a pool of assets to lean upon in terms of just the size and scope of the organization. Could be very helpful as we look forward to solving this problem. In terms of concerns, as I think of Crow Horwath, this is their first step into this very specific space, and just want to make sure that they would be the right size for this. Again, maybe some similar thoughts that I'd have with the Robert Bob Group, just based upon the size of Crow Horwath. Is this the right solution for the problem we have in this school corporation? And then secondly, just are they ready to come in and right away go about the business of looking at the Muncie School Corporation's finances, or are they more suited for a longer-term prospect and project? So those are my thoughts. Happy to get the thoughts of the board.
Speaking on, like I say, on the pros of Crow Horwath, like Micah said, I think one of the strongest things they could bring to the table, and I would say probably one of the greatest strengths of all the people that we interviewed would be the professionalism and the approach that they would probably bring to breaking down the issues and breaking down what the long-term problem is at Muncie schools, and coming up with solutions. And that really, I think, is at the end of the day what they do as a group in the consulting world. And it was definitely one of, whenever they, when we interviewed and talked to them, one of the things that they talked about, quite in depth, was the different consulting avenues that they did, and the different jobs they were on. The concern there was when they would go in right now into a job like Muncie and take that school over. And it's bringing a specific application of saying, this is what we've done. And I just, as far as the con goes, I didn't see that from Crow Horwath that this is what I've done. this is who I am, and this is who I'm going to put in place in Muncie schools. And that's what I was looking for whenever I look at from who I'm going to look at is who is that person going to be. And I need to see that person.
Anybody else? Representative Smith?
Mr. Chairman, Crow reminds me of an accounting firm, and the issue that we have in Muncie is more than about dollars. It's about people. It's about feeling. It's about students. It's about parents. It's about teachers. And I believe Crow, with Dr. Sue Ellen Reed, whose name was mentioned a couple of times, but she's yet to appear, has experience in dealing with teachers, teachers' unions, and I believe that we need someone that can bring all the parties together to the same table and find a solution. And I think they possess those possibilities. Thank you.
Any other comments on Crow? Okay. The last group to mention is administrator assistants. In terms of benefits and pros, I think of they're a group of former superintendents and school business officials, so they certainly know Indiana's school business laws and how finances work with the property tax system and general fund money from the state of Indiana. So they're knowledgeable about the system. I think that they have some individuals identified that both know the Muncie school system, but then just also generally know the education position in the state of Indiana. And so I think they would come in with pretty good knowledge right away. In terms of concerns and things to think about with them, think about some involvement that they've had with Muncie schools in the past. And so is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I think that's something that we've got to wrestle through, particularly Mr. Edwards has been a staff member at Muncie schools in the past. He's been elected to the school board, and so I think that's something to think through. I will say he's indicated to us that he'd be willing to move on from the school board position if he was chosen for this position. But again, we want to think about it. I could see that cutting in either direction, just based upon their thoughts. I think that'd be something to come up in the discussion section as well. So other comments from the board? Courtney?
Yeah, one of the things that we did learn through this process is that administrator assistant has been engaged at Muncie Community Schools in the fairly recent past. So when they were speaking, it was very clear that they were familiar already with the situation. And given then their background of being retired superintendents and school business officials, they would be able to quickly come in and get moving really from day one. I viewed that as a major benefit of them.
When I looked at administrative assistants, administrators assistants, Micah mentioned the pros and the cons, and I think the pros and the cons are probably equal as far as a weighing a positive and a negative. The positive being that they have been in that instance in that school corporation, but that's also a negative. And those were pointed out by many of the citizens and the different groups that did send in information to us that, some people pointed out that may be some of the problem. And, that is one thing that you have to be very, that we as a board have to be, very cognizant of as we move forward. And we will be, trust me, when it comes to that, as it goes forward. And one thing everybody has to remember that no matter who gets selected, the emergency manager, works, with and through the discretionary appeals board. And I think that's, if anything, one of the differences that would occur. And that's one of the, like I say, the pros and the cons. The strength of it is you do have officials that are very familiar with Indiana public schools. And I think no matter what you do, when you look at any form of government, whether it be the school corporation, a county, or a city, they rely upon their peers as their go-to people whenever they fall, whenever they falter. We recently had a county auditor that passed away, and I mean, the first place they go is the county association to go have another county auditor come in and help step in and help fill those voids, because those are the people that know what goes on within the school corporations or the counties. They're the other they're the peers. And, Indiana is, very unique in our own laws. And, the way Muncie is it's set up here, or even Gary, the idea is to go in and fix the problems and move forward for short-term solution and long-term solutions. So getting people involved that understand Indiana schools is going to only be a plus. And, that's to me the pro for administrative assistants. And like I said, the con is that they have been associated with the school. The one is the elected a member of the school board, which has said he would be not participant on a school board after the first year, which would be an ultimate requirement in my mind. As I said before, I don't believe that any one of the elected officials elected or appointed should be the emergency manager.
Other comments from the board? Senator Belton?
I'll just briefly state, I think it's a benefit, and also, it could be a negative in terms of having the connection with someone similar to the superintendent's issue. However, there could also be a benefit with this being such a short term need, being a 6 months versus a year or 2 years or more. I think also we need to look at ensuring that someone can come in and advise on a policy perspective too, as on a long road, that can advise not only DUAB but the legislature on policies that impact public education and how to prevent other school corporations from arriving to the point that Muncie has arrived in, as well as Gary as well. So I think there's a benefit of both having someone that has some familiarity with the current status, and I say that for both, and I mentioned earlier Dr. Ball, there may be a pro in that as well, but the one thing that stood out to me dealing with this particular organization was the response I heard from the community, and more favorable in supporting this. And I think, like Representative Smith said, it's going to be a collective effort. It is not just this agency or entity that's going to be put in this position. The community needs to be involved and engaged in this. So I appreciate everyone that sent emails and made calls and to share their thoughts and support in that.
Other comments on the board? Well, now we'll move into open discussion of the candidates, and as we move towards a selection process for the emergency manager. So with that, I want to just open the floor for comments from the members of the board. So anybody, as you're thinking about comparing the candidates and kind of what leads you to think one way or the other. Again, obviously we've discussed the candidates individually, but here's where we'll discuss them collectively to move towards a decision. So open the floor for that purpose.
I wrote something here. I'd encourage everybody to vote that we appoint someone with that has ties to the community. And I say that is because I think it helps make them answerable to the peers within the community, even after after we make the appointment, and after their appointment concludes. I'd also encourage that whoever we appoint as emergency manager to work collectively with the municipality's elected officials and the superintendent, as well as the school board and the superintendent, as well as the local mayor and the other community members, and not disregard what their policies are or set aside what their governing authorities are just because they can. Because the idea behind it is to try to help foster an atmosphere of trust and cooperation that will help move Muncie Community Schools forward. And therefore, I think whoever we choose has to empower that ability to create that atmosphere and foster that ability to not only work, like I say, with the mayor, with the superintendent, and with the school board. So I think you need to work with all of those entities and the DUAB to create that environment. So I think when we choose that person, I think that they need to embody all of those.
Comments? Discussion? Senator?
I think the closing comment that I would make in terms of whomever we select is not just looking at it from a fiscal perspective, but how the decisions made or decisions not made will impact academics. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about educating children, and whatever decision that is made or not made will impact overall academics. So I hope we identify a group that will be able to keep that in mind as well, and not just focus on the bottom line and dollar, but also keep people in mind, keep the teachers in mind, their thoughts and their opinions, and as well as keep the parents and the students in mind.
Other comments or discussion? Representative Smith.
I have a similar comment. All four entities that we interviewed recently, I believe, have the tools and the abilities to come in and be the emergency manager. They all have different approaches to some degree. But at the same time, like Senator Melton said, we need to focus on the students. We need to focus on the community, the children, the parents, and the teachers. And also not leave the administrators out. And we need to make decisions that's going to give these kids the best opportunity to learn, because that's their future. And it shouldn't be just about how much money that they don't have or how much more money they need. We need to find a way to make this school system work efficiently. And I know that won't be easy. There'll be a lot of toes stepped on, a lot of people offended. But we need to find an emergency manager that can bring parties together at the same table so that we can at least agree to disagree for what's best for the students in Muncie. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, I think we've kind of stated where we're certainly the primary characteristics and traits that we're looking for, and obviously we're getting down to the point of the time where we need to be pushing towards actually driving to a particular entity and making the decision on which of the four that have applied, that we've interviewed, that we've talked to, that we've very carefully considered, and now we've also discussed kind of in broader, high-level ideas what we're thinking. So I think it's important that we now start driving towards actually thinking through and talking about who that entity will be. So with that, I'll keep the floor open to discussion, but do want to recognize that we want to start moving in the direction of making that selection. So is anybody ready to say kind of what their thoughts are in terms of who fills those characteristics and what that may be? Courtney?
As Representative Smith said, I think we had four very good candidates in front of us, and with different approaches, which makes this difficult. As I've been observing what's been going on in Muncie and the community feedback that we've been receiving over the last couple of months, the community is very engaged. I think there's a lot of concern up in the community. And so while we certainly are dealing with a financial situation here, I agree with the other board members that this is as much about the people. And so looking at that and kind of wrapping that around our four candidates, I think administrator assistance is in perhaps the best position to be able to come in and navigate the personalities and the community in Muncie, while providing that outside perspective in terms of being able to provide financial statements just from a more independent perspective, and then also given their recent history with the school and working with the school, I just feel like they'll be able to really hit the ground running from the get-go. And with the school year starting soon, I think that's going to be important. We need to be able to show that by the time those students come back in August, there's stability, and I think administrator assistants can do that.
Other comments or discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Courtney, there are 4 good candidates, like I mentioned earlier, and I listened to all of them. I even prayed about this to make the right decision today. And I believe administrator assistants could hit the floor running, and I was moving on to a different thought already. Even though they've had experience at Muncie Public Schools in the past, it's probably naive of us to expect anybody to perform any services at Muncie that's going to please everybody. So you're going to have some people that are opposed to the approach you take or the results of your approach. And so I believe, too, that administrator assistants should be the one that we select. Thank you.
For discussion, Kent, do you have thoughts?
I agree with what Courtney said and what Milo said. Representative Smith, I believe that Muncie has what it takes to give us an answer quick, and I think the time frame that we have to work with is problematic, and we're trying to get a lot done really fast, and I think they can do that better than some of the other candidates. Although I agree with what you said. I believe we have 4 strong candidates. I just believe with the time frame in front of us and the parameters around what we're trying to do, that they are the best fit.
Any other discussion? One thing I wanted to just discuss and cover a little bit. I think a few things are very important as we move towards making the selection here. And then obviously we've talked about traits and characteristics, and those are all true. I think that probably from a more logistical perspective is time frame is a really key word here. The other key word, two other keywords that came to mind, time frame, scope, and perspective were kind of the 3 things that have been on my mind. So time frame has been discussed, and this is a pretty short time frame. So the importance of having somebody that can come in, see the problem for what it is, and quickly come to make sense of it and come forward with both actions and recommendations in a pretty quick manner is really important. Secondly is scope, and making sure that there was forethought and a process of even in the statute of recognizing some differences in terms of different situations. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that difference in scope between the 2 school corporations that were addressed. And what's important in that is that we recognize that. And I think that some of the entities we could go with, the scope was really large, and that would need to be recognized. And then the third word that comes to mind is perspective. And that's one of the things I think is really important, is that as we get a lot of thoughts of what is it, what's going on here, what are the finances, I think it's very important that we do have a new perspective to the space. And now, again, I would recognize that administrator assistance is not a completely new perspective to the space, but it is an additional perspective to the space. So I think it strikes that balance between being able to come in quickly and hit the ground running, while at the same time also offering some new thoughts. The other thing I wanted to say on the perspective, though, is I think it's going to be very important to maintain the engagement of the current team. And so this is not a referendum on the current team, or at least it's certainly not as I look at it, by any stretch of the word. What's really important from my perspective is it seems to me that in the Muncie Schools situation, there's a lot of questions. And one of the things about questions is that when you continue to have the same people looking at the questions and coming up with answers, it's hard for the parties to look at those answers as being independent or having the proper perspective on them. And so from my perspective now, as I think about it on the DUAB board, I think it's important to have another voice that can bring the parties together. But I also think it's going to be very important to recognize that this is not, at least this vote in my mind, is not a referendum on the current team or their plan. I think they've made some really hard decisions. But secondly, it's also going to be critically important that they continue to be engaged. And this problem is not going to be easily solved, no matter what we do. But if our actions today, no matter who we picked, lead to more fracturing and more division, we're not going to be going the right direction. And so that's where I just wanted to comment on those three pieces. Anybody else want to make a comment before we move forward?
Yeah, before we vote, I need to make a comment just because of my position as state examiner. As state examiner, I have the authority and responsibility in Indiana Code 511 to examine the accounts of all financial affairs of every public office and officer in the state of Indiana. And one of those would be Muncie Community School Corporation. And due to that, it could pose a conflict of interest if we were to go in there and audit them or audit the distress manager. Therefore, I've put into place safeguards that I have no direct authority now over Muncie Community Schools. I've assigned that away from myself to a deputy state examiner. So the responsibility for planning, supervising, and reviewing the audit for the period that will be covered by anything that has to do with the Distress Unit Appeals Board and Muncie Community Schools will not be performed by myself. So I will have nothing to do with that. So I just want to make that clear before we go forward and have any votes going that I participate in.
That's important.
For me, it is.
It's important for all of us. Yeah. Senator Melton.
Mr. Chairman, as an advisor, how do you want us? Should we vote or?
Sure. So I do not think you should vote. I think if you have comments and thoughts, certainly as Representative Smith did, feel free to add to the discussion. But when it comes time to the vote, would not do so. Is that right, Council?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, we've discussed, but we haven't moved towards a yes, Representative Smith.
Clarification. If we move forward with administrator assistance, Dr. Ball will still remain superintendent and working with them, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Actually, I would like to just piggyback off of that comment and question. And I think that is important. Dr. Ball will still be there. The school board still very much has a role in this process. For Muncie Community Schools, the powers that were provided to the emergency manager in this 6-month period, they are not as extensive as what we'll experience in Geary schools. So the school board is still very much engaged, as well as the superintendent. I think the other thing that needs to also be clear is I know Mike has said a few times now, this is not a referendum on Dr. Ball. And Dr. Ball presented a deficit reduction plan. I know he has a lot of ideas in terms of how to go about resolving this issue. And I think it's important for the community to understand that even if Dr. Ball is not selected as the emergency manager, that does not mean that those items that he's proposed are off the table. Those may still be the options, and those may still be the things that need to be done. Really what we would be looking at is just bringing in another set of eyes to review those and determine if that is the right path forward.
Well, we have discussed, and it appears there's some consensus, but we have yet to make a motion or have a second. So I'd invite a motion. Okay.
All right. I move that we appoint administrator assistants as the emergency manager for Muncie Community Schools. I would make that pending contract negotiations with them. At this point, that would need to be finalized. I think we'd have the chairman go ahead and do those contract negotiations.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second it.
Okay. Do we have any discussion on the motion?
If I may,
Yes, Representative Smith.
I assume that this contract will have a specific expiration date, correct? Could you tell me what that will be,
Yes,
or approximately?
Courtney, do you want to talk about the?
So in this particular situation, given the short time frame that's contemplated in 567, at least what I believe we would do would be that we'd have a contract that would go till the end of 2017. If at the end of this year we were to determine that Muncie should now become a distressed political subdivision, then I think we'd want to come back and redo that contract under that new situation.
Melton?
Question. In terms of the potential conflict of interest of one of the participants of administrative assistance, how do we conflict with interest will be no longer upon approval of this.
So I assume you're referencing being elected to the school board, but not starting. I think that would need to be part of the contract negotiations. So it could be a term of that. Okay. So we have a motion. We have a second. Did you second it already? All right. Well, we're ready for the vote. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. Opposed, same sign. Okay. Administrator assistance is selected. We'll move into contract negotiations shortly. And I do want to recognize that contract will come back to the DUAB board, to the District Stress Unit Appeals Board for approval when it's finished. All right, thank you all. The next order of business is a discussion of the review process for respondents to the Gary Community School Corporation Emergency Manager request for information. I did want to just talk a little bit about background on the process. Thank you, everybody that came in for that part of it. Appreciate it. We had responses were due for the RFI and were received on June 16th. And did want to recognize that pursuant to the rules in play, we can't discuss publicly at this time the number of responses received or the names of the respondents. However, we did want to look at, as we move into the next parts of this process, public presentations and interviews. I wanted to have a discussion among the DUAB of if we thought it'd be appropriate to just change or just how we address that process. I do expect it to be a significantly larger number of applicants than we had in Muncie, and the process may not be quite as easy for us to administer. And so I just wanted to have a discussion among this board of how we see that working for Gary. So I'm opening it up if there's any thoughts of just how we think we should approach Gary schools and get people's thoughts.
Personally had the pleasure of reading through them. So I think that we need to start by paring them down as ones that we feel have a fair shot of being chosen. Because I believe, based on some of the ones we received, there was a few of them that seemed like they were just applying for a job. A few of them just looked like a resume you may receive in the mail. They did not seem to fit all of the criteria within the bidding guidelines. So they would not have fit the bid requirements. I would probably not choose to invite them.
Other thoughts on our review process for Gary schools?
I agree with that. I don't know how it looks that when we pare them down. I don't know if we're going to meet again before we go up there. But one thought might be to have the chairman look at the list and see the ones that he thinks are sufficient or are in play, and pare the list down for them if you'd be willing to do that. I just thought that might be an idea, because I thought the same thing. I've read through them all, and I feel like there's some strong candidates, but I feel like there's a few that I'm not sure public comment would be helpful, if that makes sense.
And I'm really thinking of, as we talk about the process, I think that we probably both need to talk about the public presentation, but then also the interviews that we do in executive session, like we did with Muncie, just to make sure that, are we just thinking about how we see that process? So to the comments about a pared down list, I do think that could be helpful. I think it would be good for this board to maybe set some parameters in place, if that's the route we go. Senator Melton, did you have some thoughts or comments?
The route I was wanting to, I agree with paring it down. I'm not sure if there's a scoring rubric put together in that nature of looking at particular areas of figuring out where folks are stronger than others in some areas. I think it's just very important, two things. One, that there is a public presentation. I think the public deserves to hear who's going to come in and who's interviewing for that position. And two, if we have some type of way to score it, figuring out who's stronger in what areas. And so there's not just more of an opinion overall. We can just kind of speak specifically to those particular areas. I'll leave it at that, pretty much.
Could we possibly make a small little committee of maybe one advisor and 2 members, and possibly look at them and then come up with a list to present to you, maybe, or you could.
I have to ask
I would-
council on that.
I would
Yeah.
volunteer to maybe sit down with Senator Melton and somebody else to go through them.
Yeah, what if maybe we, here's a thought, is could we have, maybe we make it the duty of the chairman to do it, but I include people. I want to be careful of, and without running an idea like that by council today, just in terms of having multiple members, voting members of the board, and just how that works. What if we had, here's a thought on process, is if we had allowed the chairman the authority to do it, but I would advise and talk with the advisors on it, and then maybe with the list when we actually move towards the when we do the interviews in executive session. What if I had a list of who else was on there and why not, based upon a rubric or other things? And so then if I'd have to justify it to the board in executive session. I assume we could make that a part of executive session, where I just would go through those candidates that we didn't select for that day, and if the board thought that anybody should have been on that list, when we meet in a public session, we could act to direct me to go back and add people to the list. I think that would be, I think we would be able to make that work. So I don't know how that turns into a motion, but maybe it's that.
I think that's a good discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think that.
Okay. Do you have thoughts, Representative Smith?
Response to that, the church I belong to just went through, or going through the process of hiring a new senior pastor. We had 55 applicants. So our search team, instead of bringing all those to the elder board, rated them tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And so we looked at the tier 1 candidates first and interviewed them. And if we didn't find a sufficient one or an adequate senior pastor candidate, then we looked at tier 2. So maybe we could follow a similar process. It worked well for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that the recognizing that the board would have basically a veto power on anybody that was not brought back. So if the board looks at somebody that was not brought in for the interview, and the board thinks that person should be brought in for an interview, the board would then have a veto power with probably a pretty low threshold. So quite honestly, if not to set it up, but if any particular member of the board or an advisor really thought somebody should come in that wasn't selected, I think we could work through that. But yes, that's right. That's right. So.
In terms of, from a transparency standpoint, I know the public eventually want to know who all applied for the position, specifically because the Gary portion of 567 spoke specifically of having local individuals applied. I think is going to be important to communicate to the public at some point. I don't know if this is more of a information request that they would do, but I think we should be able to provide them with an overview of who applied and where these individuals are from, since 567 spoke specifically for Gary to have a local person interview for the process.
Yeah, I think you're right. We'll need to provide that full list. I don't think we can do it today just because of where it's at in the process based upon the IDOA rules, but we'll need to do that. But then the other thing is, because the statute contemplates that we would need to interview local members, I think that we'll need to look at this, and I don't know how many applied that were local that fit that parameter, but I would think we would need to interview them. So I don't think they would be on the excluded list unless there are, if there's very many of them that fit that criteria, then maybe we wouldn't interview all of them. We would interview the most qualified of those. But I think that we would need to, as a board, interview at least one of those or more that fit that qualification. That seem fair?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Before we release the names of everyone that applied, should we get their permission to be able to release their names that they did apply first?
Yeah, Courtney.
So pursuant to the IDOA process, once we go through and finalize our decision, that all of that will become public record. So, yes.
Yeah, so maybe it's maybe I guess I was thinking of that in the event that somebody asks for it. So maybe it's, well, we presume that somebody will ask for that information. Now, whether or not we turn around and put it out proactively, I think is an open question. I don't know if we have an answer on it yet.
All right. Two more comments I have on this particular process. One thing to keep in mind, well, the DLGF, we receive a lot of the phone calls pertaining to DUAB. And so as you are evaluating the respondents, I know Paul said that some of the respondents maybe didn't have the full set of experience that we were looking for. One thing that we have heard through our phone calls is that there are a number of people who are interested in the CFO and the Chief Academic Officer positions. So it's possible that there has been some confusion in terms of what positions we were actually posting. So I would ask that people keep that in mind as we go through this, and if we do feel that there was a emergency manager respondent that may be better suited for one of those roles, we certainly can always pass that information on as well once we would appoint the emergency manager. But then from a procedural standpoint, I think given the, while for Gary, we're certainly looking at a longer term working relationship with the emergency manager, I'm definitely sensitive to the fact that we want somebody in place as soon as possible, again, especially as the school year is coming to a start. And so I'm supportive of allowing the chairman to make those decisions just so that we can hopefully move through that process a little more quickly.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need a motion on that.
Follow-up comment on what Courtney said. One of the reasons you might be receiving a lot of comments at DLGF about DUAB is DUAB's in your on your website. So maybe at some point we might consider moving that so it be by itself. Thank you.
I know you're not counsel to DUAB, but Justin, do we need a motion on this? Okay. All right. Do we have a motion that it authorizes the chairman to pare down that list?
I would make a motion to authorize the chairman to pare down the list of applicants.
I'll
And
second.
you consult the advisors and then present it to the other members of the DUAB.
Do we have a second?
Motion.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Okay. All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, great. And just so folks know, I mean, the kinds of things that we'll all be looking at as we take a look at those. You know, is this a team of people? You know, this isn't going to be it's not going to be a one-person show in Gary. So do we have a team of people in place? Do you have a wide range of skill sets and knowledge? Can you understand complex situation and what's going on? Experience in school finance obviously is critical, and ability to cross the bridge from both finance into the academics as well, as you talked about earlier, Senator Melton, I think is going to be incredibly important in Gary. I think those are even more so than in Muncie. I think those two are going to be really critically linked for the project in Gary. And then I think it's also going to be important for somebody to have specifically urban schools experience. I think that's going to be critical. So those are again, I'll have something put together, but those are just some notes of thoughts of the kind of characteristics that will be important. Yes, Senator Melton.
Courtney, can you talk a little bit more in terms of what the process will be in terms, since you brought up the CFO and the CAO? I know folks who are wondering, is this all at once, once the emergency manager comes aboard? Who's going to do the hiring of that? Is it DUAB? Is it the emergency manager? What does that look like?
So Senate Enrolled Act 567 contemplates that the emergency manager will be the individual or the company who would be actually hiring the chief financial officer and the chief academic officer. So I believe our first step is going to be to get the emergency manager in place, and then we will work with that emergency manager to move into that next phase of the process. Certainly, I think it will be important for us to get those individuals in place as quickly as possible. So they will be key parts of the team, but we'll need that emergency manager in place first.
Yes, Senator Melton.
Since we're working with such a short time frame, specifically with the academic piece, I know when it comes down to timing, I know you say you've been receiving inquiries. I don't know, are we tracking those inquiries, are able to give that information over to the emergency manager once they come aboard? And will they be able to kind of incorporate those individuals once they, start the process of looking?
Yes, we are tracking those comments as we've received them, and we've informed people as they've contacted us and expressed interest in either the CFO or the Chief Academic Officer position, that they can certainly send that information to us. So we are maintaining all of that. And again, for anyone out there who's watching this, we do have a DUAB email address, duab@duab.in.gov, DUAB being DUAB. So you can certainly send that information in there, and we will maintain that information and provide it to the emergency manager once they're in place.
One last thing, I know we had a motion, we seconded, we voted, then we had discussion again. But that's good. I did want to say, any other ideas of criteria that the board would like me to take into account when I'm looking at paring down that list? Are there other things that folks have?
So one of the things I think we've learned through the Muncie experience is just how important the community involvement is going to be. So I think having the emergency manager needs to be well aware of that and have a plan in place for engaging with the community and keeping everyone informed.
Okay, that's good. Any others? Okay. All right. Well, we'll close the discussion of the Gary Schools process. Next item on the agenda is new business. Any new business? Okay. All right. Anything else? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.